Hi, Easy here. Welcome to another video for 3.11 Harvest League. This is a Impale Cyclone champion, a build that's very meta from starting from Legion and all the way till now. Impale did get nerfed a little bit, but it's a very low budget build starter that can scale all the way into endgame, and this is kind of a version that is already tackling endgame content with relatively high DPS for the amount of investment that I've put in. So let's first get started with the map showcase. One thing to note about this kind of build, especially Cyclone, with a champion is the clear speed is not that great. This kind of character isn't really looking to clear your maps in a record pace. It's not really looking to, one shot and off-screen enemies all the way across the map. What it's mainly designed to do is kill bosses, and it's designed to kill bosses as efficiently and as painlessly as possible. And so there are a lot of concessions that are made that are specifically for bossing and much less for mapping. For example, we don't have any investment in area effect. The only investment of area effect is a little bit of weapon range, which no longer scales, and a little bit of area effect from things like blood and sand, flesh and stone, as well as I managed to get lucky with a star forge, but before that I didn't even have any area of effect. So for the most part, you're not really looking to map particularly fast. The extent is probably maybe an onslaught if you get an onslaught on Killjoy, your adrenaline movement flask Quicksilver, and that's about it. You just leap slam a couple places and you kind of let the enemies come to you. For single target, on the other hand, the fact that we're champion means that we get 7 impales. We also get a huge amount of added physical damage from the Impale Master of Metal ascendancy, and we get a ton of armor and attack speed and evasion from being a champion as well. That, coupled with the fact that we no longer have to worry about accuracy because of our taunts making enemies unable to evade attacks, means that we can invest more of our resources into things like attack damage, crit, and crit chances. So as you can see, our mapping speed is extremely, it's nothing to be amazed at. Just casually holding right button, going down the alleyway, which happens to be our map name, and it's nothing really exceptional. Our tankiness is quite good, even with an Abyssus. We rarely die from one hit. One shots are not our problem. It's actually degens that are mostly our problem, because Fortified doesn't work on degens, and our relatively low life pool compared to what we could have also makes it a little bit more dangerous when it comes to certain mechanics. For example, bleeds are extremely dangerous. Shaper fights are also extremely dangerous. Shaper and Elder are particularly dangerous. Let me put down Ancestral War Chiefs. I don't know why I didn't. But yeah, as you can see, even in a tier 16 map, we have a relatively good amount of damage, and we're at Awakener level 6 or 5 with more life, and it's the single target is definitely one of the strong aspects of this build. Let's go into the details on a little bit of the gear to get a frame of reference for where our character is compared to what you might be expecting. So there's always been videos of people deleting bosses from previous leagues, but nowadays I believe unique bosses have significantly more health. They also have more damage reduction, so single target is a lot harder to invalidate, so to say, because when you map, you can invalidate a lot of the trash packs, a lot of the white mobs with a 4-link as your main damage. But when it comes to rares, uniques, and those bosses, even having a 6-link can often lead you to 10, 15, 20 seconds of combat, even with good gear. So single target is definitely something that I wanted to focus on because I was struggling quite a lot with my previous characters. You know, the ZDPS meme was very real when I was feeling the effects of it. So I wanted to try a build that could really tackle those endgame content, and I'm probably going to keep this guy around as my boss killer for when I spawn Cyrus and when I spawn Uber Elder and things like that. But I may have to work on some of the defenses to make sure this guy can survive pretty consistently. The defenses are still very good. We have around 5,000 armor by default. We get another 4,000 from the fact that we are champion, and we have fortify. We also have a granite flask, so we're hitting 80 to 90% physical damage reduction all the time. Even with an abyssus, that means that we can easily survive a lot of the attacks, and we can easily ignore what happens in most cases. As you can see, I'm using a Starforge. I did not have this until about a couple hours ago. What I was using was this sword right here. This is about 520 physical DPS, two-handed sword. The Starforge is about 580, along with life and ability to shock, physical damage can shock, and area of effect. So it is much better than the sword that I had, but it's by no means a huge upgrade. In fact, you'll probably be better off trying to craft a much better weapon with something like 800 physical DPS. That'll outshine a Starforge by a large margin. You can also use two-handed axes. You can also use dual-wield swords. It doesn't really matter how you build it. The only difference is going to be your passive tree and which weapon nodes that you go for. So for the most part, it just made sense for me to use a sword early on because I'm using Abyssus, which gives us a lot of melee crit multiplier. So it just made sense for me to use that. Go with the sword, go with crit multi and crit chance nodes such as Fatal Blade, these Titanic Impacts, and both of the melee crit clusters. When it comes to my chest, I managed to drop a Dex and Strength chest piece and a corrupted Sixth Link from one of the Val side areas with pretty good life and resistance. So I used one of my I used the Benchcraft to guarantee a blue socket for infused channeling, and this is the result that we got. Got pretty lucky. For our ring, we have a Dex and accuracy ring with life and a bit of fire and lightning resistance. This was more of a generic ring that I thought I could use for any of my melee builds because it has such good life, it has such good accuracy, and it also has Dex, which a lot of strength characters are missing, and it comes with a little bit of resistance. I actually don't need the accuracy whatsoever, but this was the only ring that I had that filled out my fire resistance, so it's staying as is. I have a Circle of Guilt with reduced mana reservation and increased physical damage while affected by purity. We actually don't need this. I would prefer to have another ring with more life and something like a Curse on Hit. That would be much better. For our amulet, we have physical damage to attacks, very low life that we managed to slam, and triple resistances. I could easily make this much better with Harvest Crafts, removing fire, adding fire, removing cold, adding cold, removing lightning, adding lightning, removing life, adding life. And I could do this over and over again until I got the rolls I wanted, but this is a relatively low item level amulet, so I didn't really bother. I'm sure once I get into builds that I feel more comfortable investing super heavily into, that's something that I'll look at. We have an Abyssus for an helm, nothing special here. I managed to get a 40% increased physical damage instead of 50% increased physical damage, so that's really solid, along with a pretty high roll for a melee critical strike multiplier. So I was fairly happy with this helm that dropped. For our gloves, we're using an intelligence gloves with resistances and life. That's all it really is. It gives us intelligence, it gives us resistances, it gives us life. I would love to have an attack speed craft on here, but that'll be a little bit harder to get. I could easily remove and add life so that I can get a spare suffix, or sorry, spare prefix for the attack speed. But this is what I'm working with at the moment. For my belt, I'm using Raislath's coil. Once again, this is something that I managed to drop early on. I use it for my bleed bow gladiator, and I'm also using it for this character. You can also use the overleech belt, soul tether. I personally believe this is a better belt for general purpose, but because I wanted to try and really push single target DPS, that's why I was using Raislath's coil. For my boots, it's also just a lot of resistances, movement speed, and life. This one actually is very good for me because it manages to fill out my resistances to the best. Like, it takes care of the most of my resistances by far. I'm still trying to find a add cold, remove cold modifier so that I can add on a cold resistance, and I also want to add on a better life. But I'm waiting for a nice pair of 85 hunter boots. I managed to get a 85 redeemer boots for elusive on kill once I roll it, and I'm just waiting for my 85 hunter boots so that I can also use that and use an awakener orb, which hopefully may drop in the future, to create elusive and tailwind on hit boots for majority of my characters. For my flask, I'm using the Lion's Ore, a diamond flask, and an eternal mana flask for now. You actually don't need this. I would prefer to have a sulfur flask, just a regular sulfur flask, because it gives us consecrated ground. It also gives us 40% increased damage, so that's pretty good sources of damage there. But I'm using an eternal mana flask because our cyclone costs 8 mana and we can't actually sustain it unless we're leeching. And we do have mana leech from this passive node here, but it can be easy to find yourself in a situation where you don't have mana at all and you're left helpless. And so in order to avoid situations like that, I am using a mana flask on purpose. And when we go into a passive tree, it's nothing really particular. We'll first talk about the ascendancies. The first nodes that I took were Master of Metal. This is going to be a huge boost to your single target DPS, especially when you take impales into account. I think this ascendancy node alone gives me like double impale damage, as well as 50% more damage to single targets after taking impale into account. So this is probably the strongest 2 nodes that you can get out of any ascendancy when you look at impale builds. Next, I took Conqueror and Worthy Foe so that they can't evade my attacks, and I took Unstoppable Hero so that I can't be stunned while I fortify. So this node is actually a lot more important than what it seems. You might think, oh, it's just some armor, some attack speed, and attack damage, but the fact that Cyclone no longer has stun immunity by default in 3.11 means that this ascendancy node is a lot more important than what it initially seems. You can easily get stunned out of Cyclone if you don't have higher life. You can easily get stunned and frozen and stuff like that. So having immunity to all of those effects is extremely important. You can easily take Fortify if you have enough accuracy, so that you have perma Fortify. You don't have to use the Fortify gem on your 6th link, which allows you to use a stronger single target DPS gem. But I personally think that's way more endgame, to the point where even having a little bit of damage increase from swapping out Fortify to like Pulverize or something like that will be a lot more significant. Interesting disconnect. Will be a lot more significant than having the ability to ignore accuracy altogether. And you can also go for something like Inspirational if you go along with the Fortitude route, but I personally didn't bother with that. I think this is probably your de facto choice for ascendancy points. For our passive tree, because we're in solo self-found, and it's a lot easier to make one good weapon than 2 good weapons, and the fact that the sword, the two-handed bases got stronger this patch, I just decided to go with the two-hander again. And I'm using a two-handed sword, so we're taking nodes like Wrecking Ball right down here. We're taking nodes like Titanic Impact, and that's about it, right? Those two are the only two-handed specific nodes that we're getting. So you can easily swap over to a dual wielding swords if you want, with something like Paradoxica, or you can, if you get a savior, you can slap on a savior and a nice rare one-hander. You can also go with axes if you really like, but I think swords are better with something like Abyssus. If you don't use Abyssus, you can easily swap over to axes without any issues. So there's a lot of flexibility to what kind of weapon you want to use. In the future, if the cluster jewels, once they get patched so that they're a lot easier to craft, I would love to take these 3 nodes and build on a large cluster with 2 medium and 2 small cluster jewels once I have access to those, and eliminate this entire section of the tree altogether, because it's a lot of travel nodes, and we have enough dexterity from our gear to not have to worry about all of this travel node dex, and that'll give us a lot more strength and a lot more defenses because of all the cluster jewels and all the life notables that we can get from small cluster jewels. But we don't really have access to those great cluster jewels just yet. I don't even think I have good medium jewels, and I certainly don't have small cluster jewels. So that's not an option that I have at the moment. But if you're trying to min-max, that's definitely where I would push into getting more cluster jewels. I think that's pretty much it for the character overview. There's nothing really particular. You know, Pantheon, just I usually use Naris with Raklesh, so that the bleed degen effect is a lot easier to manage. But oh, we have to talk about gems. You're right. So for our gems, we have a Cyclone with a 6-link, Cyclone Impale, Brutality, Malefiz, Fortify, and Infused Channeling. If you have Fortify from another source, you can use Pulverize instead and enjoy a little bit more area of effect. On our helm, we have Herald of Purity, Flesh and Stone, Maim, and Enlighten. You don't need this Enlighten, I just had it, so I slapped it on so that I can gain more experience. For our boots, we have a level, it should be level 1, a level 1 Precision for just 50% or 22% increased strike chance, Second Wind, Enduring Cry, and Brutality. This is just here leveling up. It's not actually, you don't actually need this. On our gloves, you have Dread Banner, Blood and Sand, Molten Shell, and Cast when damage taken. Do note that Cast when damage taken is level 2, Molten Shell is level 11. So this is gonna cast as often as possible. Blood and Sand and Dread Banner are just here. On our weapon, or just another couple links, we have Blood Magic with Leap Slam and Faster Strikes, and Blood Rage, and we also have Culling Strike with Ancestral War Chief. If I were to have this in like a 5-link, then I would have War Chief with faster attacks and Culling Strike, so that it's more consistent throughout that Culling Strike effect. And Blood Rage, just put it over here instead, like so that you can have another link instead of this Brutality just leveling up in there. So when it comes to gems, you have a little bit more flexibility. I personally thought it would be good to use Enduring Cry with Call to Arms because of how strong this regen effect is. If we use Blood Rage and let it tick down a bit, okay, that's gonna take forever. Enduring Cry, as soon as you press it, you just go right back up to full HP. And this effect also scales with something like life recovery rate. So if you manage to get that somewhere, you know, that's also great. But overall, I think this build is extremely strong for almost any content that you want to tackle, except for something that requires high amount of clears. I personally didn't really enjoy this character too much. I've always shied away from doing a Cyclone build for quite a while now, because I just knew that a traditional Cyclone wasn't really my thing. I like having the extra effects. I like having extra clear from things like spells, things like Volatile Dead, or etc. So I knew deep inside I would enjoy it. I just got frustrated at my single target DPS for a while. So I was like, you know what, fuck it, I'm gonna make a single target character. And it does the job, but single target, outside of the single target, clear leaves a lot to be desired. I think I will be retiring this character, so it's just for single target needs if I really feel it. But I think other characters in the future can easily handle single target just as well, without the need to have a shitty clear. So I'll probably look into that. I'm not sure what my next build is going to be, but I am going to be out of town for the weekend, and I'll be a lot busier in the weeks coming up, so I probably won't be able to post as frequently. And as for the Ascendancy carousel, I think it's still something that I want to achieve, but I think I'll have to span it out across multiple leagues, because there's no way I can get 19 Ascendancies in a single league. I just don't have enough energy and devotion to making crappy builds over and over again in solo self-found league especially. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.